Welcome to On the Brink with Andi Simon. I'm Andi, and as you know, my job is helping you get off the brink. And I think these are most interesting times because when things are changing fast, you are very unsettled. The uncertainty makes it difficult to make good decisions. You're not quite sure if what you used to do in the past is the appropriate thing to do for the future, and the future is never clear. But on the other hand, you have some confidence based upon what you used to do that the future will be pretty predictable based upon what you know. But right now, things are such in turmoil and disruption, and it's not just tariffs. I had my teas the other day. It's tariffs and trade and taxes and talent and technology. And those are all creating a world going through a major transformation. Today I have with me Dave Bookbinder. Now, Dave was kind enough to put me on his conversational podcast. It's all by the numbers, and he will tell you more about himself because I'm going to give you a very short bio, but I want you to listen to him carefully. He specializes in business valuation, and he has a lot of good books, writings about don't underestimate the power of your people for the value of your organization. And I would tell you don't underestimate the value of your culture for the value of your organization. So we have a whole lot to talk about today that's going to be helpful for you if you're thinking about, am I going to keep this business for a long time or a short time? Do I want to sell it? Is it a family firm ready for the next generation? How do you think about the value of your business? A little bit about Dave. He's a business valuation professional, as I mentioned. He served thousands of client companies of all sizes and industries. Many types of intellectual property and tangible assets that Dave has valued are human capital assets. As we were talking, he holds a bachelor's degree in economics from Temple University and a master's in finance from Drexel University. But he's also an accredited senior appraiser in business valuation with the American Society of Appraisers and holds the designation of CEIV, certified in entity and intangible valuations. Now, some of you are going to say, really? And I'm going to say, yes, really. There are some very good certifications that make him extremely expert and experienced in this. He's the author of 3 books now, Dave. And he's going to tell you a little bit about all of them. The one that I found most interesting is the new ROI, the return on individuals. So think about it. You have people and you have processes and you have projects and you have all kinds of wonderful things leading to profits. But how valuable are your people? Probably the most important thing. He writes about business and leadership at CFO University, TLNT.com, Thrive Global, and he's been a contributor to the Huffington Post. And he also has this wonderful talk show called Behind the Numbers. I'm not going to say much more about Dave. I'm going to ask him to tell you his story. It's always more interesting than a bio. But what it does is make him come alive so that whether you're listening or you're watching, you're going to say to yourself, what can Dave help me? Does he have tips and tricks for how can I really understand the value of my business? And then we're going to talk about some important things for today, like how do I value a company that's going through change or a changing business environment? And how does that affect my value? And what are my people? Do I keep them? How do I manage them during these changing times? What are people in a time when things like freelance or gig economy become so common? Dave, thanks for joining me today.
Andy, it's a pleasure. Thank you.
Tell the folks, who's Dave Bookbinder? How'd you get here?
Well, thank you for that really kind introduction. I'll try and keep this brief because you certainly gave me quite the intro there. So the short story about Dave Bookbinder is I grew up in the corporate finance world, doing mergers and acquisitions, starting in valuation, of course, but working my way up the corporate finance ladder and got involved in buy side and sell side M&A, raised some debt for companies. I also did asset-backed securitization. And after having all the fun cocktail party conversations, one day realized that valuation was actually the thing that turned me on the most. So pursued that, got some professional designations, which you described in the intro, and I've had the opportunity to be involved in leadership roles at some very fine valuation firms. I currently lead the valuation practice at an accounting firm called Hafley Flanagan, where we help privately held companies for the most part in valuing their businesses around all the issues that you just described. You did mention that I have a designation in intangible asset valuation, and I valued a lot of IP assets over the years. The ones that get all the ink, so to speak, are things like technology and patents, customer relationships, and trademarks. And then there's the human capital component. And you already know this, but for your audience who has probably heard every CEO on the planet pound the table and say, our people are our most valuable asset. Where do those people sit on the balance sheet where all the other assets are? Well, spoiler alert, they don't. And one day I decided that I needed to do something. I needed to write something. I just felt compelled to do it um, about how we in our valuation profession value people. Didn't think that it told the whole story. So I had to be really careful, right? Because I don't want to throw stones at my profession because I don't agree with the way we do something. And I also had to be careful not to piss off the entire accounting world because people don't appear on a balance sheet. So there was a fine line that I had to walk while conveying my personal frustrations. And at the time you mentioned I was still contributing to the business section of the HuffPost. So dropped the article there and on LinkedIn and never thought anything of it except people started to show up in my life and ask me, what's next? You can't stop there. Well, I had never thought about anything beyond one article. So the article turned into a series of articles. People kept asking me, what's the master plan? And honestly, Andy, there was no master plan. It was just, I was going with the wave, and wherever I was inspired, I wrote something. And anyway, one day it occurred to me that after all these requests, I had to aggregate the content in some way. So that kind of felt like it needed to become a book. So that was my journey to prove that people are really your most valuable asset. It's called the New ROI, Return on Individuals. If you're looking on Amazon, it's the one with the white cover. There's another sister book called the New ROI, Going Behind the Numbers, which is a compendium of the conversations that I've had on my podcast, Behind the Numbers, with various leaders talking about things that they've done to implement culture change and how it's impacted their business value. And then the last thing I'll say, and I'll shut up, is you did mention the third book, which I recently dropped, which is a valuation toolbox for business owners and their advisors. And I felt compelled to publish that because I've had so many conversations with business owners who have a real misconception about what their business is worth. How do you value your business? How do you even think about an exit? And this little toolbox is designed to hopefully help some folks out there as they think about these processes.
Well, you know, Dave, you're in a trusted advisor group for Vistage. I'm a speaker. I've done 500 talks for Vistage and Tech everywhere. India, Mexico, Canada. I mean, it's really interesting to be involved with the CEOs of companies of all sizes with all kinds of backgrounds and being able to talk to them about something of great importance to them. You know, how do I value my company? And part of the question for us today is how do you value your company? What are the mistakes you make? And we can start there. Thinking that something is a value that's not, and I know that's important to you. And then how do you begin to think about it in a changing business environment? Let's start with, well, you know, the mistakes people typically make, and then we'll talk about the environment they're trying to do it in now.
Yeah, one of the most common mistakes that I see is people relying on the back of the napkin or back of the envelope valuation method.
Uh,
Um, those aren't valuation methods, Andy, as you probably know. Uh, so the short story is they rely on either rules of thumb or info that they get wherever they're out networking. So business owners tend to network among other business owners, and they hear conversations on the golf courses. Yeah, I sold my business for 15x. Well, what does that really mean? But they hear a multiple and they get it in their head that that's something they can achieve. I just recently completed a valuation engagement for a client who's transferring his ownership to his daughter. He got an offer a few years ago and declined it. So as a part of my diligence, I need to understand, what was the nature of the offer? Why'd you pass on it? And what he explained to me was, well, if somebody's going to come out of the blue and offer me this, then surely somebody else is willing to pay more for this. And oh, by the way, I could earn this amount over the next several years and just take it on the come and then sell the business for even more than that. Well, with hindsight now, the reality is when you sum his profitability over the recent period, does not even come close to what that offer was. And going backwards in time, I just had to check. The implied EBITDA multiple on that offer he got was about 17.5x. Yeah, I know, right? Thank you. For those of you who are listening, Andy's face just exhibited some extreme shock.
Well,
Um,
I'm married to a serial entrepreneur, so I get it. And what you think, but that's a lot of EBITDA
yeah,
multiple.
that's a good multiple,
You can
but
do that, you go for it.
he didn't do any research around it to vet whether or not they made any sense. And now in this current market where we're valuing his business, he's worth about 7 times. So that's a huge mistake, and I see that far too often. So that's one. I'll give you one other one that I see a lot, and investors hate this. So a lot of times business owners are managing their businesses to avoid the payment of taxes, right? So you'll see zero net income or close to net income because they don't want to pay any taxes. And then they get to the point where they're thinking about selling their business, and then they present you with a forecast that looks like what we call the hockey stick. Well, here things have been flat, and then all of a sudden, the shaft of the stick goes way up north.
I'm sorry to
Investors,
laugh, Dave. I'm just sorry to laugh, but I've been there. But please continue. I'm so sorry.
yeah. So the key takeaway there is that buyers and investors are savvy, and you have to be able to demonstrate that you've been there and done that. And as soon as they see that hockey stick forecast, your credibility goes out the window. And the credibility is a very important component in how buyers and investors think about putting a value in your business.
Give me a few more. I like those because we've all been around people who have been so impressed with what they've created that they have no idea what it's worth and ignore what somebody might offer. But the other part is, um, you know, how you manage your business and anticipating something in the future called a sale matters. So, are there a couple of things that you could advise them to do to make sure they have the value that they think they're going to want to get out of the business? I mean, there's taxes or there's value. It doesn't sound like you can have both.
Right, because if you're managing your business not to pay income taxes, and you're putting all the personal expenses through the business, then you're going to be talking about add backs, the adjusted EBITDA. And that's where you're now throwing the personal car, the brother-in-law who never shows up for work but's on the payroll, and a whole boatload of other things. You get it. You've seen the movie, right? Um, it's a lot more prudent to have a clean set of financial statements and not have to be explaining away EBITDA adjustments when you're at that moment. But here's the thing, to answer your question directly, the selling of a business is a process. It's not just an event. And a lot of business owners don't actually think about the process. Sometimes they get blindsided, ill health, some catastrophe happens, and then they're forced to sell. If you have the luxury of time, take advantage of it. Get your ducks in order. Talk to a good group of advisors who can help you navigate the waters of a business sale, and make yourself ready. Think about if you're selling your home. Before you put the house on the market, number one, you're going to want to get it appraised, right? So you have a rough idea of what you're going to get. And then you need to assess, what does the landscape look like for other homes in the market? What have other business or other homes sold for? Make some adjustments for the number of bedrooms and so forth, access to transportation. Before you then go to the market, you're going to make sure that the walls have good paint, carpets are clean, you've done the touch-up work so that you're presentable. It's a similar thing with the sale of a business. So getting your financial statements clean, stop running the personal expenses through, get an audit or a financial review done by a certified public accounting firm that will give investors and buyers the comfort that they need to understand that the numbers are good. At the opening, you talked about uncertainty. Uncertainty is key in valuation. Investors and buyers hate uncertainty. And the only way they can price uncertainty is to risk adjust your business. So the more things that you can do, if your audience takes away nothing else today, the more things you can do to de-risk your business, the better off you're going to be.
Give me an idea what the risking a business might look like.
Well, one would be like the financial statements I just referred to, right? So you're going to
Right.
have numbers that somebody can rely on. If you have a situation where you've got a management team, where you can start to begin to delegate if you haven't already done so,
Mm.
the operations. So the idea is that if you get hit by the proverbial bus tomorrow, will the business still survive?
Yep.
If the answer is no, you probably don't have a real saleable business. So that's another way to start de-risking it. Processes and procedures. A lot of times the smaller businesses don't really have those things in place, but button them up and put those programs in place in a formal way so that there's a guidepost for people to follow. So those are just a couple of things you can do to de-risk your business.
In
And when you
some
think
ways,
about a business plan,
yes.
it's about looking forward with a thoughtful eye, not an overly optimistic eye, because now you say that you want to sell your business and you're going to develop that hockey stick, because people are going to challenge you. They're going to ask you, how do you get from here to there? What are the underpinning assumptions about growth in terms of sales and profitability and margin expansion? And oh, by the way, how do you expect to be at EBITDA margins of 40% when the publicly traded peer group, the big boys, have EBITDA margins that are half that? Tell me
Mm.
that story. So you've got to be credible.
Well, I mean, you're pointing to many things, though, that are also essential to running a good business. And I'm listening to because I've had clients who have been at $10 million, wanted to go to $100 million, and they were all running by family members, and they had no scalability, no understanding even of how to get scalable. And so we started to work with them about a mindset change. You're talking about a mindset here as well, because he couldn't possibly sell a business that was so fragile, even if it was making a lot of money, because it was so unclear there was any value in the management team. It was a product. And how would we ever get some growth out of that? So in some ways, running the business as with good value to sell the business or to take it public or anything requires a good management skills about how do you run a business in a good way. Does that make sense?
It does. I just want to share one other thing because we spent all this conversation talking about the sell side of a business, but there are other reasons why you need to have your operations buttoned down tightly too. Because especially nowadays, I'm seeing a lot of business owners who are doing that generational planning, and it
Mhm.
isn't necessarily a sale. It's like I alluded to before, the story of the owner who is transferring ownership to his daughter. There's a lot of that that's happening. And there's a valuation exercise that's associated with that as business owners are gifting shares or if they're creating any kind of stock compensation program, you've got to know what the value of the equity of the business is. And one of the other mistakes that sometimes business owners overlook is that there are valuation discounts that get applied in that situation. Things like the lack of marketability of a privately held company, and then also a discount for a minority interest in a privately held business because minority interest positions don't have the economics of the prerogatives of control that a controlling interest would.
So much to think about within the business in normal times. Now we have something that's quite traumatic, which is uncertainty at a level that we probably have, apart from the pandemic, or maybe the 2008 recession. I guess we've all lived it through tumultuous times. These aren't any different from that. But I'd love the listener or the viewer to begin to think through how to become strategic in a time of uncertainty. Humans want certainty. They want to protect their status. They want to know that what they've done will work tomorrow, and therefore I'm good to grow. But these are not necessarily the same. Your clients are changing, the business environment is changing, financing is changing. I'm mentoring some women business owners who all of a sudden found the deep freeze coming. Clients who had come to them to do things, just put a deep freeze on. We're not going to spend money now. Or we're in the federal contract business, great company, running beautifully, all of a sudden to find no federal contracts, all stopped. And so how do I begin to build the business in uncertain times other than, and I'm working with them to reinvent them? What are your thoughts, Dave? How do we help them think about this?
Wow, there's so much to unpack there. And a couple of things came to mind as you were framing the question. One is when you talk about uncertainty and how do you navigate it, I thought about the difference between Blockbuster and Netflix.
Yes.
And when you mentioned about doing what you've been doing, if you keep on doing what you've been doing, you're going to get what you've been getting. And sometimes that doesn't work to your advantage, and you need to be mindful of what's going on in your industry. So again, think about what Blockbuster and how Netflix kind of surpassed them and became a successful business in that space. But I've been around long enough to remember valuing businesses in the dot-com era.
Oh, yes.
And talk about uncertainty then. I remember having a conversation with the CFO that I'll never forget. He handed me a projection for the next 20 years where they were never making money. And I asked him, so what's the path to profitability here? And he literally scolded me like I have no clue about finance because I'm such a dummy because for every dollar that he's losing, that just increases his multiple even more. We're selling eyeballs, not profitability. Well, they were gone in 6 months. And at the end of the
Forgive me
day,
for laughing. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But please continue.
I still chuckle about that too. See the sock puppet, right? At the end of the day, businesses are valued based on profitability. It's about their cash flow. It's a forward-looking exercise into the future. It's sure the investors and buyers want to know what have you done last year? What have you done the year before that? What are the trends historically? But you can't just rely on a multiple or a discussion of trends historically. It's really they're buying the future. So an extreme example, if you've got two companies with identical sales and identical profitability, but you know that one just lost a key contract and next year the sales are going down and profitability is going down. Does that company get the same multiple that the other one has if their trajectory continues forward, upward? No, of course not. So it's a forward-looking exercise. And the way the math works is it's a present value calculation of the future economic benefits of the business. And that present value factor is also called a discount rate or a risk rate. That's the numerical depiction of risk. That's how the buyers and investors quantify the risk in your business. So when I talk about de-risking your business, if you can do those things, it will incrementally lower your discount rate in that cash flow scenario. And the lower the discount rate, the higher the value. That's just math.
It is just math. Having said that, um, when we are looking at an acquisition that we want to acquire, apart from our own business that we want to be acquired, how should we be, really significantly critical of what they're showing us? What should we look at? And I'll give you a question why. I wrote an article once for Business Week, Small Business, and companies were buying out competitors. And they were buying out competitors only to find out that they were buying a red ocean where they now had more supply and not enough demand. The reason they were taking out their competitors was that they weren't doing so well. And I had to scratch my head and ask, what are you actually trying to do other than the envy, jealousy, and hate? I want to get rid of them. They're my competitor, and very silly emotional reasons. So, but you want to roll up something, you want to acquire something, you want to get into a market. How do I look at their valuation from our perspective and from what they're telling us? Thoughts to share.
Yeah, again, you ask such insightful questions, and there's so much to unpack in all of them. Uh, a lot of buyers are asking for something that's called a quality of earnings analysis. So if you're selling a business, and I mentioned earlier, get an audit, get a review to help give you more stability and credibility. Um, Oftentimes with buyers, that's not quite enough. They'll come in and kick their tires themselves, bring in another group of professionals to do a quality of earnings to test that the numbers that you provided really are rock solid and start to pick holes in where maybe there were some issues historically. So that's one aspect of it. In terms of rolling up businesses, here's an interesting fun fact for you. Depending on where you get your data, I think it's between 75 and 90% of businesses fail to live up to their projected synergies. When you combine the businesses, the idea is 1 + 1 = 3. And most of them don't live up to that. And the number one reason for that failure isn't valuation, it isn't systems, it's failure to integrate people and culture.
Hmm.
So that's a critical component nowadays that you're analyzing who are you buying? What's the business, of course, but who are the people and can you keep them? Because there's a lot of institutional knowledge that unfortunately walks out the door as soon as people hear that their company is being sold.
Yep, and they go find some other place to play.
Yeah. And that's so much harder to replace than you think. There's a lot of folks who naively believe that, sure, people are fungible. Don't let the door hit you on the butt in the way out, and we can replace you in a heartbeat. But then when that individual or group of individuals is gone, they start to realize there's a lot of nuanced things that weren't in their position description.
It has nothing
And
to do with the position description. It's how he got things done. And that leads to
exactly.
the question of culture. How many M&As fail because you created an aardvark and a giraffe and you wanted it to live together? And we do a lot of culture assessment, culture change work, but that's a typical problem that the value of the company is as much in the way they get things done and the things that they value and believe to be important as it is in the fact that they make a profit at it. It's not just the outcome, it's how we got there. What are your experiences? Because I'd love to talk culture just a little bit.
Yeah, no, completely agree. I talk about that and write about that a lot in the new ROI series. So you're preaching to the choir on that one, my friend. But I think there's a causal relationship there. So when you talk about the companies that are successful and are outperforming their peers, I would argue that it's because of their culture. It's not the other way around.
Yeah.
It's the ones that are doing the right things around the culture create the engagement, which drives the innovation, which drives the above and beyond, that whole spirit of commitment. And that lands on the bottom line and it impacts the value of business.
And I'll give you an interesting client situation. We were hired by someone to figure out what was going wrong. He had a very old business that had declining sales. Exactly what it is isn't important, but if you go from $1 billion to $500 million in sales, that's the wrong direction. And so he had a lot of cash, and he took it and bought several other businesses that were not related to his. They were family firms, and he removed the family leader who had built each of those businesses. And he wanted them to be more process oriented to get the results the way his business was, only to find out that their cultures were far more collaborative and innovative. So they got results without the rules that he thought were essential for achieving results. And a hierarchical, rules driven company and a family firm that's full of collaboration and teamwork and don't necessarily play well together. And he said, I don't understand how they don't understand what I'm telling them and why it's important to do it. So they speak a different dialect of English, and their culture, which is the behaviors and the things they did to get things done, are just different than yours. You didn't just buy a company, you bought a whole culture of how they were successful, and you're trying to impose on it a foreign object. And you would be better off going in and enabling them to be successful the way they were, or find a whole new crew of people who are going to do it for you. He was not happy. And I
Yeah.
bet you've seen similar kinds of things.
I've seen that from an advisor standpoint. I've also lived it personally, um, where my employer acquired someone or we were acquired. And I even just drill it into somebody coming into a new role. Somebody took over a leadership position, took over a department, and didn't even bother to ask, how do you guys do things? Literally just came in and said, here's how we're going to do it now. And I believe over the course of the next 18 months, he lost every one of his key people.
It isn't simply a good way to do it and a better way to do it. This is the way, this is our daily habits. And the body, the human, doesn't like to learn new things without knowing how it's going to help them either keep their job or do their job or have a happy day at the end. And it's much more complicated than simply to your point of saying, this is the way we're going to do things. And everyone looks left and right and says, I'm out of here. I'll find a place where I can be me. Hmm?
Change management is tough. It takes time. You can't just come in and set everything on fire. Your best bet is to just observe, take things in, see how things go, talk to people, get a real good understanding and lay the land, because you may actually learn something and find ways to implement what the acquired company had been doing into your business.
And in some ways, you ignite that kind of engagement in the folks, the talent that you've acquired is waiting to be opened up and blossom with new leadership, but you can't simply tell them they're bad. And if we're so bad, why'd you acquire us? I'll give you one
Yeah.
more example and then we'll go sort of wrap us up because I love sharing these. They make me laugh on one hand, but they also help me understand what's going on with people running businesses. We had a large healthcare system and asked us to come in and understand how we could help the acquisition of new hospitals take on their culture. And exactly which hospital it was is irrelevant, but they were sure that they had the right culture. And each of the hospitals that they were acquiring needed to become them, only to discover that they didn't really have a culture. They just had the illusion of one. And those other hospitals were doing just fine, thank you. And it doesn't matter whether it's healthcare or manufacturing or service industries. The people are complicated dudes. And if you're going to build and value them, so taking us back to your beginning, the ROI of people is really the core of what we are looking at today. And all of these folks who are looking to sell their business really should pause for a moment and take a good look at what the value of their company is intelligently and not create those hockey sticks in hope. Hope is not a good strategy. Dave, tell us about your books, all of them, so people can go and find them, because I think we're about ready to wrap us up.
Sure. So thank you for that. So the first one is the new ROI, Return on Individuals. That's the white cover. That's my journey to prove that people really are your most valuable asset. The black cover is the new ROI, Going Behind the Numbers. And as I mentioned, it's a collection of the conversations I've had on my podcast, Behind the Numbers. And the latest book is the Valuation Toolbox for business owners and their advisors. A lot of good tips and tricks in there, including common mistakes that business owners make, things to think about when you're exiting, why you need a good forecast, and also a discussion of the impact that people can contribute to your enterprise value. So that's the discussion on the books. I appreciate that, Andy. Thank you. They're all on Amazon in all formats. In fact, they're now also available as audiobooks.
Good. Did you record them yourself?
I did not. Amazon enrolled me in one of their new tech programs, and I
Oh,
guess it's an AI generated thing, but they graciously included my books in that program. So now, by virtue of their tech magic, you can listen to my books.
they are so smart. They created a whole new product for you and made
They
it.
they did because I was reluctant to do it because I really couldn't find the right voiceover person for it. And anyway,
Yeah.
they made it real easy.
Well, it's interesting because I recorded my first one. It's a lot of work. And I had somebody
Not
for my
kidding.
second one. It's a lot of work. So this is so interesting. Okay, so I'll make sure that on our podcast blog we have those up there so that the readers or the listeners can easily click through. If they want to reach you, so you could do a valuation or help them do a better one, I'll put that up also, but where could they reach you?
They can find me all over the web. They can find me on LinkedIn at Dave Bookbinder. If they're curious about the new ROI series, they can check out newroi.com. And if they'd like to learn more about the podcast Behind the Numbers, you can find that wherever you get your podcasts. And I just do a real quick humble brag because Behind the Numbers actually just was the recipient of 2 awards recognizing us as the top valuation podcast.
Wow, I'm honored to have been on it. Thank you so much. What a cool thing that is.
It is a cool thing. And here's the really cool thing. It's not really a valuation podcast. This is just between us and a couple of million people. But yes, it's about valuation from the standpoint that my end game is to talk about how leadership and culture impact the value of a business. But we're not having the quantitative analysis conversations that would make your eyes bleed or your ears bleed if you're going to listen to it. I assure you that it's a little more engaging than what you typically might expect in a valuation quote podcast.
I don't think we discussed any numbers. We discussed bigger
Yeah.
concept. The bigger picture is, what is the value of the business I'm building? How do we make it worth more? And I'm particularly impressed with Dave's focus on people and the culture because it's the business is, someone once said to me, you're an anthropologist. I thought you study small scale societies. I said, what makes you think a business isn't a small scale society? And they went, oh, I said, my gosh, just take a look at the rituals. And take a look at what brings people in that belong there and who leaves because they don't belong there. And it's very much a human phenomenon. And we organize because we like to be together. And when people don't feel they belong, they find some other place to go to work. It's not just a job. So this is pretty cool. So I'm going to thank you, Dave, for joining me today. It's been a pleasure. Let me make sure I tell the folks who have been listening 2 or 3 things that you should remember. One of which is that your business has value, but you're going to have to make sure you really manage it so that the value is obvious, whether it's for today, for simply a valuation or a sale for the future. Don't play with the business so that you don't pay taxes. Make sure that you're setting it up for whether you're going to pass it on to somebody in your family or you're going to try and exit. So many of the folks who I'm working with are thinking it's time to exit my business. Maybe, maybe not, but valuation isn't inconsequential. And the second thing is that your real value is in the people who get the job done. It's not just your products or your services, it's the culture in which they're working and the way in which they've developed a kind of expertise and experience that you're selling. And your clients engage with them. They're part of the whole complexion of your company. And these are very interesting times. You're going to have to rethink, who are you? And how do I do this? And why me? The branding question. Always, why me? So, for all of our listeners and our viewers, thanks for coming. Thanks for sending us all of your ideas about who we should have on here. I know you've enjoyed Dave today, and you can share his podcast to everyone you love to share podcasts with. All of my books are on Amazon. Women Mean Business. My most recent book is just sitting there waiting for you to enjoy it. Rethinks Sharing the Myths of Women in Business. Smashing the Myths of Women in Business is an award-winning book. And On the Brink, A Fresh Lens to Take Your Business to New Heights is also an award-winning book. And both of those have brought me great clients, either to help them build better cultures for women and diverse people to live in and work in. And On the Brink is about how little anthropology can help your business grow. And I enjoy both sharing them and sharing your stories on our show. Today, I'm going to say goodbye to Dave Bookbinder. Please, pass along his wisdom and make sure you understand why your business is so special and make sure it truly is so special. Goodbye for now. And remember, take observations, turn them into innovations, and be an anthropologist. You will enjoy the journey. Goodbye, Dave. Thanks a lot.
Bye, Andy. Thanks so much.
Thanks for coming.